Good afternoon everybody and welcome to today's webinar, Becoming a WGEA Employer of Choice for Gender Equality. My name's Philippa and I'm from the Department of Employment and I'm helping to facilitate today's webinar. Just so that you get the best experience of today's webinar, you can check that you're connected to audio by checking the webinar console. You can listen through your computer audio or you can dial in on the phone and listen through the phone. We will be playing a video, and if you dialed in on the phone, the audio won't come through the phone, it will come through your computer system. So just double check that you don't have a USB headphone or any headphones at all plugged in so that you can hear the audio of the video. I'm now going to hand over to Rochelle, who will be conducting today's presentation. Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you, Philippa. Welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar on becoming a workplace gender equality agency, employer of choice for gender equality. My name is Rochelle Kiley and I'm a senior advisor here at the agency. With me I have two of my colleagues, Joanne Moore and Sharon Parfait, who are also senior advisors here at the agency, and we will be presenting to you today. But before we begin today's session, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are recording and conducting this webinar session. In Sydney City, the traditional owners are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and to the elders in other communities on the land from which you are participating today. As we share our knowledge, learnings and research, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country.
Thank you, Rochelle. The webinar today is going to run for approximately an hour, and we're going to firstly go through an overview of the EOCGE and its process, the prerequisites for becoming an employer of choice for gender equality, and considerations that you should take before applying for the citation. And then at the end, as we're going to run a poll and close the session. So with the poll at the end of the webinar, we'd really appreciate your feedback. So if you wouldn't mind taking part in that, we'd love you to do that.
Indeed. Okay, so in 2016, there were 106 organisations that were awarded the Employer of Choice for Gender Equality citation from the agency. And now we'd just like to show you a short video message from our director, Libby Lyons, about becoming an Employer of Choice for Gender Equality and what it means, really. So, Philippa, can I ask you to load that video now? And I hope you enjoy it.
Hello. I'm Libby Lyons, Director of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. The agency's Employer of Choice for Gender Equality citation recognises Australian workplaces that are leading the way towards gender equality. So far, over 100 employers have achieved this recognition across a range of industries, from mining to healthcare, finance and education. When you see an organisation display the Employer of Choice for Gender Equality logo, you know it supports all employees, women and men, by offering flexible work, tackling gender pay gaps, supporting parents and carers, and encouraging gender-balanced leadership teams. CEOs and employers tell me that the citation means such a lot to them. It provides a roadmap to better gender equality outcomes, which we know leads to better business performance. Being publicly recognised for valuing and rewarding all employees equally also helps attract and retain the very best people. Applications are now open. If your organisation is taking action on gender equality, I encourage you to apply. To find out more, have a look at our website or please give us a call.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philippa, and Libby, of course, for her words there. From this year, applications are automatically visible in the portal once you need to have submitted your compliance report be compliant with the Workplace Gender Equality Act of 2012 and meet all the prerequisites.
So today we're going to be referring to two key documents throughout this webinar, and these were emailed to you either yesterday afternoon or some people might have received them just today, and they are the Guide to Citation and the indicative format of the 2017 Workplace Gender Equality Agency's EOCGE citation. So it would be helpful to have those guides in front of you, or at least the Guide to Citation document as we go through this webinar today. If you don't have it, you can obtain it from our website now, and you just go to www.wgea.gov.au. You'll need to hover over the lead tab with your mouse and then click on the Employer of Choice for Gender Equality section, and then applying for the EOCGE citation, and then the links to the document are on that page. So let's move on. The Employer of Choice for Gender Equality citation, or EOCGE, as you probably have gathered at this stage, as we call it, application is divided into 7 criteria, as you can see on the screen now. So these are strengthened each year to reflect leading practice. So we don't just let sleeping dogs lie. We always strengthen those criterion each year with something more. It may not be that we change all of them, but certainly there would be some changes each year. But under each criterion, there are a number of evidence-based prerequisites that must be met, and the key words here are evidence-based. All the prerequisites must be in place and operational, you should be aware, by your submission date, and that is this year, as you know, has been extended, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we don't have time to go through all of the prerequisites today, so we're just going to go through the key ones that in our experience here at the agency as assessors, all 3 of us here today will be assessing your applications if you are applying. But as assessors, we do get a number of questions that we always either have to go back for more information about, or they generate the most inquiries, and they will be the ones that we'll be talking about today that require specific action from the organisation or follow-up from the agency.
So what has changed in 2017? So with the application process, the applications were opened on the 1st of June 2017, and the deadline to complete your application and submit it has now changed to the 30th of September 2017. The EOCGE applications are available in the portal for all organisations now that have submitted their report, and the application can be found under the Recognition tab. While all compliant employers are able to apply for the citation, certain prerequisites need to be met in order to be eligible. The list of successful organisations will be announced in mid-February next year, and if your organisation has been awarded the citation in 2016, it will remain an EOCGE organisation until the next list is announced in February.
Okay, so let's have a look at the process for applying. First of all, you need to go into the portal with your Oz key to the same area on the dashboard where you would have submitted your compliance report under the reporting tab, but this time you need to go to the recognition tab, as you can see on the screen there. You will be able to click on the Not Started at the bottom of the page, as you can see it there underlined in red, and that is a hyperlink which takes you into the actual application. So you need to complete your application online. You can't do it offline, I'm afraid, so that's the only option. And you need to then, once the application has been completed, submit online. Then finally, you need to make payment using the separate payment form, which will appear at the very bottom of the submission screen once you get in there. And the fee for this year to apply for the citation is $750, and that payment should be made as soon as the application has been submitted. So make sure you submit it first and then just process that payment. Lastly though, all EOC applications that are submitted to the agency here are confidential. We don't disclose the information in them.
Okay, so before beginning your application, it's recommended that you go to our website and download the Guide to Citation, WGEA Employer of Choice for Gender Equality for 2017. This, it details all the prerequisites you need to meet, along with some other important information. So if the question is not a prerequisite, you can tick no and you'll be given a yes or a no option. In the guide, you'll see questions with a tick, which are prerequisites. Red ticks, which are labelled new prerequisites in 2017, show which prerequisites are new for this year. Any new prerequisites for next year are indicated by a 2018 in the column next to the relevant question. In the guide, you will see there is an asterisk next to any questions where you need to provide additional information to substantiate your response. So just a little bit about the structure of the applications. The questions relate to 7 different criteria, as we saw on the screen earlier, and you must answer all questions. Even if they are not prerequisites, you still have to answer all the questions to apply for the citation. And if you're trying to decide whether your organisation is ready to apply for the citation, we would recommend that you use the Guide to Citation to assess whether you meet all the prerequisites.
Okay, so the other thing that we do as part of the application is we conduct interviews with your CEO. It's a 15 to 20 minute interview. There are set questions, but there's usually some other dialogue as well. The whole idea of conducting these interviews is that we want to gauge the level of commitment that your CEO has. Are they a leader in this space? Do they have vision in this space? Are they actually championing gender equality both internally in your organisation and also externally? They're the sort of things that we want to know. So basically, is your CEO championing, I'll get that word right one of these days, gender equality generally? In the interview, there's usually a senior advisor, so one of us here, or some of our other colleagues, but there's usually also an executive manager of the agency, and sometimes even our director will sit in to attend the interviews. So you should be aware that it's not a daunting interview, but at the same time, we really want to know that your organisation is genuine in this quest to be recognised. Senior advisors will contact you, the report contact, once the application has been submitted, and we will arrange a suitable time for your CEO to be interviewed and the date that is suitable as well.
Okay, so we're now going to turn to the next section for today, which is to discuss key prerequisites that need to be met for the WGEA citation in 2017. You'll see that the questions in the application match the requirements set out into the guide to the citation. What we'd really like to do now is just give you some definitions and talk about what policy and strategy mean and what a formal policy or strategy means. So just to give you some meaning of these terms, which you'll see throughout the document. So for policy, we define policies to be guidelines, rules and procedures developed by an organisation to govern its actions, often in recurring situations. They define the limits, so the do's and the don'ts, for example, within which a decision is made. They are not an informal description of the way things are done within the organisation. It's not an informal, undocumented process. and it's not a set of individual best practices or tips for improvement. A strategy defines objectives in a particular area and the underlying business rationale. Typically, it will also indicate how these objectives will be realised and an assessment of risks and success factors. Strategies fill the gap between where we are and where we want to be. So a strategy is, how are we going to get there? That's really what that piece is. A formal policy or strategy, what we mean by that is a written policy or strategy that has been approved by human resources and or management, and a formal policy is usually widely communicated and available to and accessible by all staff. A formal strategy can also be widely communicated, although it usually deals with the allocation and deployment of material and human resources and requires executive decision. If you would like assistance with building a gender equality strategy, on our website we have the Gender Strategy Toolkit developed by WGEA, and it's an excellent place to start. And you'll find this together with other supporting resources such as videos on the lead tab of our website.
Thanks, Joanne. So let's have a look at criterion 1. So in becoming an employer of choice for gender equality employer, we encourage organisations to take a strategic approach to improving gender equality performance rather than a programmatic approach. And you'll see that criterion 1 requires you to have your organisation have a formal gender equality policy and strategy that is incorporated into your broader business strategy and planning process. So question 1 actually asks if your organisation has a formal policy and formal strategy in place that supports gender equality. So that's a lot more than just not mentioning one gender or the other. It actually has to support gender equality as such. And that's what we would be asking for there. In question 2, we ask here whether all of your managers in the organisation are required to entrench flexible working for their employers. So what does that mean? Well, so it's not a single item that entrenches flexible working, but it's a mix of things that managers do that helps flexibility become part of the culture or the way that things are done around, the organisation. Examples of how they communicate, role model, enable flexibility that are relevant and should be quite different from how the organisation as a whole will promote or train or have policies. This is about what the managers do. So what we're looking for is information about what they do. And when we talk about entrenching, when I think of entrenching, I think of the word drenching. So it needs to be everywhere. It needs to be, we need to know from what you say in your application that that flexibility is everywhere and it's felt by every employee in the organisation. The next part that we then look at and very, very often have to go back with questions about are the CEO statements. And this is all about championing, I can't get that word, gender equality. So there are a few basic rules here. The statements that you give us must have been made in the last 12 months prior to the submission date. They must have been made to a specific audience. So it might be external, it might be internal, but you need to tell us that it has actually been made to a specific or the audience that we're asking about, and it must show very clear communication of the CEO's commitment to achieving gender equality or gender pay equity or whatever it is that we're asking you about in that specific question. Your organisation must provide the statements to the agency with details on how and when the statement was communicated. You need to include the text of the statement when answering the question. Please don't send us hyperlinks because we really can't access them a lot of the time. So we need the actual statement. And we don't need to see the full copy of the document. We just need to see the part of the document that is specific and appropriate to answer this particular question. One statement made by your CEO could in fact meet several of the questions. So again, we just need the relevant part of the statement, but it should be referenced under each question, not just put in once and then see question 4.2 or see question 4.9. You need to put it in under each of them, please. Criterion 1 also specifies other areas in which the CEO must be a visible champion of gender equality. For example, they must actively promote flexible working arrangements. They must personally role model flexible working within the organisation. They need to participate in external knowledge sharing and public advocacy on gender equality, and the CEO should promote flexible working to the organisation as an acceptable norm of working, along with working flexibly themselves. For instance, maybe they leave work early, or maybe they go surfing every morning before they get to the office so they don't get in until 10 o'clock, or whatever it might be. Maybe they attend school functions or family occasions, or they have caring commitments. All of those things are about working flexibly and managing the flexible working of their own time. So your CEO must advise all staff that your organisation is applying for the EOCGE citation as well. Then moving on a little bit, questions 11 and 12 under Criterion 1 refer to your organisation's systems and processes. So your organisation must analyse its systems and processes to identify gender bias in decision making in relation to recruitment, training and development, promotions, talent identification and succession planning. It must take action. So this is what these questions are about. It's about what action do you take to eliminate gender bias where it is identified, and monitor and measure how progress is going.
Thank you, Rochelle. We're going to look at criterion 2 now, which is learning and development. In this criterion, we're assessing an organisation's policies and processes aimed at building capability throughout the organisation, as well as having career development and leadership programs in place for women and men. This criteria is fairly straightforward, so we're going to let you go through that yourself. However, you will notice as you go through, there are a lot of references to formal policy or formal strategy in this section. So when I was talking earlier about policies and strategies, that's going to apply to this section of the citation as well. So now we'll move on to criterion 3.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. So this criterion assesses an organisation's policies and strategies yet again, and processes to address gender pay equity and show progress in closing any gender pay gaps over time. So just so that you're aware, and just in case you're not aware, or as a refresher, we will now describe what we mean by the 2 types of gender pay gaps that we come across, and what could be in your particular organisation. So the ones that we look at are the like-for-like gaps, and this refers to pay gaps between women and men undertaking work of equal or comparable value. So comparing jobs at the same performance standard, for example, or comparing 2 senior engineers in the same organisation. That's what we mean by like-for-like gaps. Organisation-wide gaps, on the other hand, is the difference between the averaged remuneration of women and the averaged remuneration of men across the whole organisation. So clearly, if you have a lot of managers who are men and a lot of women who are in a production line, for instance, you're going to have a large organisation-wide gap because you've got men in management who are earning an awful lot more than what the women are who are working on the production line. So that's something that we would look at as well. Or it could be the other way around too. You could have a lot of women in management and men on the production line, who knows. Okay, so then looking at question 22 and 23, these require that your organisation must have undertaken a gender remuneration gap analysis in the last 2 years. This gender remuneration gap analysis must include base salary by gender, total remuneration by gender, and starting salaries by gender. And this is an area where we have had to follow up quite substantially with organisations on a number of occasions. So please be aware of it. You do need to be aware that a gap analysis, a pay gap analysis, is more than just completing the workplace profile as part of your compliance report. You need to look deeper. For example, you could analyse your data by comparable occupations to identify segregation and determine whether you need to do a job value analysis, or maybe leadership levels is another area that you could look at. There are barriers to getting women into leadership. If there are, for example, the reason might be a lack of part-time work availability in that particular area. Flexible work conditions is another area that you could have a look at. Could flexible work be concentrated in traditional female roles, and so men aren't getting that available type of work? Tenure, is length in a role or experience the best measure for determining remuneration? That's questionable, I have to say. Qualifications, are they really required to perform the duties that are required for a particular position? And components of base pay, for example, overtime, are all the men or all the women getting overtime, performance pay, discretionary payments, all those sorts of things. Have a look at who's getting those sort of payments. Annual salary increases is another area, but they're just some examples of how you can do a deeper dive into your pay data. Also, question 24 requires that where gender remuneration analysis has identified gaps, action must have been taken in one of the specified ways. So, for example, you might have created a pay equity strategy or an action plan. You might have identified the causes of the gaps. You might have reviewed remuneration or decision-making processes. If you've taken action in other ways, you could include that detail under that question. But the agency has a number of different resources to assist you in conducting a gender pay gap analysis and developing a pay equity strategy, including a guide to gender pay equity, a gender pay gap calculator, and briefing notes for the CEO, the directors, managers, employees. They're all on our website, so you can always hop on there and have a look for those resources.
Our next criterion is flexibility in other initiatives to support women and men, and it looks at the organisation's policies, strategies and processes to encourage the use of flexible working arrangement at all levels of the organisation, and it includes questions focused on parental leave. As far as parental leave goes, the organisation to apply must have at least 8 weeks of paid parental leave at full pay to be provided to the primary carer. And there's a few points of note here around primary carers and length of service and that sort of thing. So I'll just go through that. Primary carers leave must be available to both women and men. Employer-funded paid primary carers leave should be available to both male and female employees, regardless of how a baby enters the home. For example, it could be through adoption or born to the parents themselves. The paid component must be in addition to the government's paid scheme, not just by topping up the government scheme. If you do top up, the top-up amount must be for the full 8 weeks at full-time pay. It only needs to cover permanent workers, and the maximum eligibility period, so the length of service, should be no more than 12 months has passed to be eligible to be for the primary carers leave.
Jo, there's just one other thing I wanted to point out there about the primary carers leave as well. We've had a few organisations that have primary carers leave available to both women and men for adoption leave, but not available to women and men if the baby is actually born to the parents naturally. If that's the case, then you would not be able to apply for this citation. It needs to be available regardless of how a child, as you said earlier, comes into the home, but it needs to be available equally regardless of the way that the child enters the home. Okay, sorry.
Thanks, Rochelle.
That's all right.
Also, there must not be a requirement for employees to pay back any portion of their paid parental leave if they do not return to work after the leave. Within criterion 4, there's some other prerequisites which focus specifically on men. So question 34 requires your organisation to tell us how it actively encourages men to take both primary and secondary carers parental leave. So really examples of this may include profiling men who take parental leave on internal or external websites, internal or external publications, or on the intranet, having male managers that have taken parental leave speak with staff to promote the option and encourage men to take the leave. But importantly, it must be overt communication that parental leave is also available to men. So it's what we're looking for, stating that men are including men in, that you're including men in parental leave policies does not meet the prerequisite. To meet the prerequisite, we need to know how the organisation actively encourages men. So give us as much information as possible about how that is actually done in your organisation.
We come back and ask a lot on that one. We do. We make a lot of, we come back almost to every organisation to ask for more information. So the more you can give us, the better it is. Thanks, Sharon, for saying that. Okay, so we'll just continuing on in flexibility under criterion 4. There is a new prerequisite this year at question 44, and your organisation must have a formal flexible working policy, but it also must have a formal working strategy. So your formal flexible working strategy must ensure that flexible working is promoted throughout the organisation and that leaders are held accountable for improving workplace flexibility. You'll also need to provide supporting information about how this is achieved. So for example, it could be done by having a dedicated page on your intranet that explains why flexible working is a win-win for women and men at all levels of the organisation and how they can access it. Ensure that managers overtly work flexibly and that have them report on how they have progressed entrenching flexible working for their team is another possible way that you could show that it is available throughout the organisation. Then question 46 requires that your organisation must actively promote flexible working arrangements to both women and men. This could include things like talking openly about working flexibly at staff or town hall meetings, or having managers talk openly about how they work flexibly and being overt in doing so. Having examples of these on intranet sites or in staff newsletters, giving information about how to go about applying for flexible work. It's also very important to actively encourage men specifically and to address issues that they must that concern men specifically, such as career progression, which is a very big issue that we're completely aware of. And tell us about how you are addressing those issues. Question 47 under criterion 4 is in 2 parts, and it asks about how managers in your organisation are supported to manage flexible working. So you must answer both parts of this question. Firstly, you have to advise us what materials your organisation provides to its managers to educate them about how to entrench flexible working. And then the second section asks what specific training your managers have undertaken to help them to put flexible working into practice. And that training needs to have taken place by the time you are applying. So by the time you put your application in, that training must have taken place. Okay.
So we'll move on to criterion 5 now, which is employee consultation. And again, this is an area where we find we have to follow up quite a number of organisations that apply for the citation. So we're going to spend a bit of time on this and go through it in a bit of detail. The criterion gives an indication of an organisation's culture in relation to gender equality using feedback from workers via anonymous survey questions. We look for evidence that the employee experience reflects the content of your organisation's EOCGE application. So now let's go through the elements of employee consultation that are prerequisites for the EOCGE. If you're looking at the guide to citation, it's questions 49 to 51. So the criterion requires your organisation to consult with workers, including casual workers, which we must point out we do have to go back and ask whether sometimes casuals are included. So you're asking questions on issues concerning gender equality in the workplace in an anonymous survey using a 5-point scale. This must have been undertaken in the last 2 years, and there are specific requirements for the survey that we receive a lot of questions about and conduct follow-up on the area. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to go through a few of those now. As far as the questions go, the survey questions are either those which are specified by the agency, or you can use alternative questions provided you have received prior approval from the agency. So what you need to do there, we supply 3 questions which are recommended. My immediate supervisor manager generally supports gender equality between women and men. The second one being, I have the flexibility I need to manage my work and caring responsibilities. And the fourth one being, in my organisation, sex-based harassment is not tolerated. As I mentioned, you can replace these questions with your alternatives, provided they are comparable to and align with the intent of the 3 questions. And very importantly, you must get agency approval on the suitability of alternative questions before conducting your survey.
Because we don't always accept all the questions that are suggested at face value. Sometimes we'll amend a couple of changes or have them align a little bit more closely to the ones that we've provided. So it's not a fait accompli, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it is important to check.
Yeah.
And then put those replacement questions into your application so we know what questions have been asked, although we keep a record of them as well.
Yeah. So then when you're conducting the survey itself, the organisation can determine the most appropriate method to conduct the survey. However, the process must facilitate anonymous participation, as Joe's mentioned a couple of times, and it must use a 5-point scale. For example, it could be strongly agree, not sure, disagree, and then strongly disagree. The reason for the 5-point scale is so that you've got a midpoint. So, you know, there has to be some midpoint in a questionnaire situation. So some examples of how organisations may choose to conduct the survey include pulse surveys or incorporating them into questions into an existing survey. It might be a biennial employee engagement survey, that sort of thing, or other organisations incorporate the questions into an existing process, for example, rolling it out with another forum, such as within an organisation-wide training session, that type of thing. Others use different feedback mechanisms, but the main point is that the confidentiality of the respondents needs to be maintained. There's also a particular sample size and response rate that you must meet. Your sample size must be significantly, I can't speak today, sorry, significantly, statistically significant is what I meant to say, and representative of workers in your organisation, including casual workers, as Joanne mentioned before, as well as gender and age. So if you've got a wide-ranging age profile, you need to be able to say, yes, it covers all of those. Your organisation's sample survey is considered representative if you obtain 400 or more responses. Now we know that not all organisations have 400 employees, so if you're in that situation, your response rate must be at least 60% of your workforce. So there are more details, of course, in the guide, as you'll be able to see there.
One of the last points we want to make about the staff survey relates to analysis and results thresholds that you need to get. You must analyse all responses by gender, and analysing all responses received, your organisation must firstly achieve an agreement threshold of at least 65% agree or strongly agree on the 3 questions or the approved equivalent questions. So that's 65% agree or strongly agree. And secondly, your organisation must achieve an agreement threshold above the industry norm for the survey tool used. So either one of those would be acceptable. And again, the guide to the citation has more information about how to calculate the agreement levels for the survey questions, including an example there as well. The results of your analysis must include the gender breakdown of responses for each question, and if you're unable to achieve either of the above thresholds I mentioned, there is a legitimate and significant reason why that's happened. For example, a merger took place when the survey was conducted, maybe one reason, maybe some other restructure reason, for example. Please consult the agency to discuss the details, because the agency will use its discretion basically to determine whether your organisation will be still eligible to apply for the citation based on your survey data results. So if there is any reasons why you haven't met that threshold, please let us know.
Okay, so moving on to criterion 6, which is preventing sex-based harassment and discrimination. The criterion here recognises that sex-based harassment and discrimination in the workplace has significant impacts on the organisation, which can include reduced personal well-being of its staff, depression of those experiencing the harassment, increased absenteeism, reduced job satisfaction, organisational commitment and productivity is reduced, and an increase in employee turnover. The questions here are pretty straightforward, to be honest. The only point that we wanted to emphasise is that your organisation must provide workplace training on sex-based harassment and discrimination prevention at induction, as well as at least every 2 years. And this training must be provided to all of your managers and all other workers, including contract and casual staff. So you need to be able to say that that happens. Okay.
The next criterion recognises the process of setting voluntary targets for gender composition, and then tracking, measuring and reporting progress, which promotes cultural and structural change, focuses on efforts, embeds accountability, and sends a a strong message that gender representation is a central business issue. So for this criterion, we want to draw your attention to the requirement that your organisation must set numerical targets with timeframes to improve the representation of women, where there is less than 40% representation of women on the governing body, where your organisation has control over its governing body appointments, and also on other governing bodies, where your organisation has control over other governing bodies and across all levels of management. The targets need to be future orientated and may reflect an organisation's internal structure, and therefore could be different to the workplace profile that you submit in your compliance report. However, we don't cross-reference with the workplace profile for an indication of accuracy.
Actually, we do. We do cross-reference with the workplace profile.
Oh, sorry.
My apologies, Jo.
Sorry.
We
For
do.
assistance with setting targets, please refer to the WGEA's Guide to Setting Gender Targets, which is available on the agency's website. Okay, so your organisation must evaluate or report, communicate its progress towards achieving targets to improve the representation of women in management by tracking progress internally and reporting to the governing body and key management personnel.
The reason that we do cross-reference is because we need to see what you've said in your workplace profile and whether it matches with what you're telling us in your application.
So we understand that organisations will often have different categories of management than what we have in a workplace profile. So we're not expecting that to be an exact match across, but we're looking to see that the targets make sense.
Yes.
So that, you know, if you've got a particular area where you've only got 20% women and you've said that, you know, you want to have a target of 50% where you've already got 5%, we just look to see that it's realistic. And the other point is that when we talk about future orientated targets, what we mean is that sometimes people say, oh, we've got a target to have 30% women by 2016, but we're in 2017.
Yeah.
And so the target is something that you're still striving towards, not something that you've just got as a maintenance kind of target.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Sharon and Jo. So basically, here's some things to think about. Action items which should have been undertaken before applying for the citation. So you need to make sure that you've got your CEO's statements at the ready, that he or she has made those statements and that they match the requirements under question 4. You need to make sure that you've got policies and strategies in place that support gender equality as such. Are gender biases being eliminated, and how do you know that? Are you tracking it? What are you using to track it? Tell us about it. Do you meet the primary carers leave requirements? That's a very important one for us here. Most specifically that there is an 8 weeks minimum after 12 months service, that it is available equally to women and men regardless of how the child enters the home. Is flexible working being entrenched? Remember that word. I always think of drenched in something, being entrenched in your workplace. Is it everywhere? Or are you doing your best to have it everywhere? Have your managers been trained in flexible working? What's the training that has gone on, and has it been completed by the 30th of September? Or will it be completed by the 30th of September when you apply? Have your managers, oh sorry, I beg your pardon, what have you done to promote parental leave for men? What have you gone out and done specifically that is totally focused on promoting men taking up primary carers leave and secondary carers leave, but most importantly primary carers leave? Have you completed your consultation survey? Have you done your training for sex-based harassment and discrimination prevention? And have you got targets in place for your board, for your managers, for the workforce generally where it's applicable. They're the things that you need to think about. Look, it's not a complete list, but we've chosen these particular action items because we do receive a lot of questions about them, and typically we have to do a lot of follow-up with them. But look, if you're concerned, if you're thinking, oh, we're almost there, but we're just not going to get across the line, call us, talk to us. We're really happy to talk you through where you're at, and maybe we might be able to get you across the line for this year. We'd love for there to be more employers of choice citation holders this year, and we're only too willing to work with you. If you're very, very close and you just need a little bit of help, please give us a call.
We're very experienced with assessing these now. We've had the employer of choice application for a few years, and we're very familiar with the sorts of things that help people just come across the line, or whether we need to talk a little bit more about helping you understand things. And we're enthusiastic about helping everybody become an employer of choice as well, because it's often more achievable than people realise.
Indeed, that's a very good point. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide, please, Sharon. Thank you.
Okay, so basically just prepare yourself to apply, read the citation, check if your organisation meets all the prerequisites and what information you need to address there, gather your information, and then progress to the portal and complete your application. So basically familiarise yourself with the citation at a high level to see if this is something your organisation would be interested in applying for. But you also should be aware that if you don't meet the prerequisites, your application may not be accepted. But as Rochelle said, if you're close, then do give us a call. We can always guide you through and help you across the line if that's what's required. But if you aren't accepted, you may also get part way through the application and find that you don't meet all the requirements and actually not finish the application. That's okay. You don't need to complete the application. You can just log off and leave it. But as Rochelle said, please call us if you're close there.
Indeed. Okay. So look, just on the screen here are some of the resources. We spoke about where to find the guide to citation. It's here on the under the lead tab on our website, as you can see there. And the two main guides, the guide to citation is there, and also the indicative format for this year's employer of choice. That's just a Word version to give you a little bit of information so that you can share it with others. Okay.
We have other tools and resources as well, such as the Gender Strategy Toolkit, the Guide to Gender Pay Equity, Workplace Flexibility and Strategy there, and how to set gender diversity targets. So quite a wide range of tools and resources across the 6 gender equality indicators.
Indeed. Okay, so that concludes the formal part of this presentation today. However, please stay with us. We're just going to run that quick poll now, seeking your feedback on today's webinar. So please take a moment to answer the question. It's going to be on your screen in a second. If you wouldn't mind putting that poll up now, Philippa. The question is, on a scale from 1 to 5, how useful did you find the webinar session today? 1 is not useful and 5 is very useful. And if you've got any specific questions about what we've been talking about today, or we didn't address something that you have a burning need to know the answer for, please give us a call here at the agency. We're always happy to speak with you. And if we don't know the answer immediately, we'll certainly come back to you as soon as we can with the answer. So, okay. Right.
So we might just bring up the next slide, which is advice and assistance there going forward while the poll's continuing.
Oh, okay, we're almost there.
Yeah.
Sorry, you can't share a slide while I'm
That's
doing
all right. That's okay. All right, Philippa, I think we're pretty much there. Thank you so much, everyone, for answering that question.
Okay, so I have closed the poll. Do you want me to wrap things up for you, or?
No, there's just
Yes,
one
okay.
more slide. Thanks, Philippa.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, don't seem to be able to get to it. Okay.
Oh, well, look, thank you for taking part in today's webinar and participating in the poll. If you're, we hope that you're more familiar with the Employer of Choice for Gender Equality Citation and how to apply for it. There we go. If you want any advice and assistance, please contact us. Our details are on that last slide there. You can call or email us and ask to speak to a senior advisor. We also have our our social media there, which is indicated with our Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn sites, which will give you information on the agency as well. So thank you very much for taking part in today's webinar, and I wish you all the best with applying for EOCGE.
Thank you. Thank you, Philippa.
Thank you, everybody.